Ah, how's it going, everybody? I wanted to do a quick video. The weather right now is blazingly cold for everybody. So, but it's supposed to start to warm up a little bit toward the end of the week. So we're going to deal with this for the next few days. But then it's going to start warming up, which is, because these temperatures, whew. Anyhow, I'm going to try to make this as fast as I can possibly can, because this is a thing that I'm still seeing floating around the internet. And what I'm still seeing floating around the internet is there's so many different people with so many different setups. The reason being, and they're making these arguments of in the box versus analog. And people are still trying to make this argument. And it's like it becomes a mute point. Actually, it becomes a mute argument. And I'll tell you why it's a mute argument. Because if anyone watched my studio tours, I have 3 different setups. One's a practically in the box setup. Now, where it's set up isn't ideal because it's basically in my dining room. But, that's where it's at right now. The other setup I have is in my front room, which isn't ideal, but that's where I have it set up. And then, of course, this setup is in my bonus room. But that's just happened to be this because this is a house. Because I got so much stuff, you would think, oh my God, he's got stuff. But actually, the livable portion of my house is not the gear and all the equipment I got set up in this room are really not a huge impact to me cooking in the kitchen or sitting at the living room watching TV or sleeping in my bedroom or using the bathrooms or working in the garage, or it has no impact. So, but I wanted to say this. I wanted to make this video to say this. I kind of, people are always making an argument of in the box versus analog. Yet there are a lot of people that makes the argument about in the box, but they got a ton of outboard gear, or they have quite a bit of outboard gear. I'm like this. I should do a video, and I'll say this. I'll put it like this. I'll say this. If people watch my latest studio tour, what I did a studio tour update. My studio tour update for 2023, even though it's 2024 now. I did a studio tour update for 2023, and I start at the dining room where all I have is just a MIDI controller, which is my Arturia Keylab keyboard, a laptop with an extra monitor so I can see the mixer, because I always split the screen between working in the tracks and then going to the mixing window and then all I had was just the audio interface with a pair of monitors. The only thing that I've added to that was the small 6-channel or 8-channel, maybe 12-channel little mixer to enhance my studio monitors, because it helped with that. That's about it. I don't have a huge setup. I don't have any external preamps down there. I don't have any compressors down there. I don't have any outboard gear. But anytime you see someone say they work in the box, but they got tons and tons of outboard gear, it's not working in the box. They're working hybrid. They can argue I'm working in the box, but no, you're working hybrid. If you use any external compressors in your mix, any external EQs, you're working hybrid. Now, when I worked in my setup, then that little setup, my little studio setup right there, I don't have any compressor. I use all plugins. The only thing that I'm using is the preamp in the interface, because you have to have an interface, period. That's not debate. That's not a debatable argument. You have to have an interface. The great thing about interfaces is that most interfaces come with preamps. That's the only thing you need to record to be in a box. Graham of the Recording Revolution made a prime example of how you can take $300 and make a recording studio with it. Basically, all he said was a pair of studio monitors, an interface, the software, and the plugins. $300. I think you need a little bit more. I think you need at least a MIDI controller with DAW control on it, like transport encoders. At least add that. So I would say at least $1,000. But you also need a set of headphones. That's all you really need to be in the box. That's 100% recording in the box and working in the box. And a lot of times when you watch that video of that studio tour, I start off playing tracks that I did strictly using in the box and the plugins, including the keyboard VST plugins. I didn't use anything external except for the bass guitar, because I like the sound of bass guitars and I plug that in the preamp in the interface. That's it. There's no external gear. So a lot of people need to get out of this mentality that I'm working in a box. If you're using external gear, any external compressors, I don't care if you got your favorite LA2A, 1176, Distressor, Need 1073 preamp, API, or clones, Warm Audio, or whatever. If you got all that outboard gear, you're working hybrid. If you got a semi mixer, you're working hybrid. You're not working in the box. And all these guys say I work in the box, they don't. The only person that works truly in the box with just a laptop and headphones is like Andrew Sheps. He gets the mixes and stems and files and plugs them into the software, his Pro Tools, and then he uses all plugins. The downside to working clean the box, the only really downside to working in the box is you need a powerful PC or MacBook or iMac or all-in-one PC or whatever. You need a powerful, at least 32 gigs of RAM and a powerful core processor and a big hard drive. A couple of terabyte hard drive. Other than that, you're good to go. You're good to go. So, all these people, if you're in the box, your setup should be something like my setup in my dining room. All I have down there is just a laptop, a couple of monitors, a couple of studio monitors, my MIDI controller, and the interface. That's it. I use all plugins. I use either my keyboard to play my sounds into, whether I'm using Studio One, Cakewalk, Harrison Mix Bus, one of the DAWs, or I use the plugin software instruments. I use the same effect processors, and I use all the plugins, the compressors. Like my favorite ones are Acoustic Audio and IK Multimedia, as well as there's some other plugins that I like tremendously. Like, that's it. I'm using all the plugins and basically either my external keyboard, bass, or the plugin instruments. That's it. After I get everything recorded, I use all the internal plugins in that software. That's working in the box. So if you come here and make a video and talk about in the box, but I start seeing you got racks of gear, you're not in the box. You need to stop it. You create a fallacy. You're working hybrid. And here's the thing. There's no such thing as, there's only a few studios that are either doing tape, hard disk recorders, and everything else is a console and outboard gear. There's very few places working like that. But there are some places that still use a console. They use either a radar or some sort of hard disk recorder, a Mackie or a Lisa's hard disk recorder, a console, and outboard gear. Here's the crazy thing about all of it, whether you're working hybrid, but even with your commercial studios like Blackbird or Larrabee or Record Plant or East West, all of them are hybrid. Even though they have Neve consoles, they have tons of outboard gear, but if they got a Burl or a Pro Tools, Avid, 192 interface or an Apogee Symphony or whatever, and they're going into Pro Tools. They're working hybrid. And that's the reality of it. Everyone, these people, I'm working analog. No, you're working hybrid. You have to eliminate the computer altogether to be completely analog. But even I did a video where I was mixing with analog, mixing with ADAT tapes. If you go back and look at my archive videos, I did a video where it says mixing on ADAT tapes. I had to use the ADAT tapes because I don't have a 2-inch tape machine. I can afford a 2-inch tape machine today. I couldn't afford them back in the day when we won them. And that would be back then. You was a tape machine, console, outboard gear. And that's how studios worked in the 70s and 80s and mid 90s. It was a tape machine, outboard gear, and a console. Now today it's Pro Tools or Studio One or Cubase or Logic, plugins, and an interface in your laptop or your MacBook Pro or whatever. So everyone has gone pretty much in the box completely that way, or mostly a lot of people eventually start going some sort of hybrid, meaning they're going to get some external preamps, some external compressors, some sort of rack gear. A lot of them get studio desks where they get the studio desk, and they'll put stuff in the center, and they'll put a few pieces of outboard gear here and a few pieces of outboard gear over here, maybe some racks, and they start building up their analog rack gear. So they start becoming more and more outboard gear hybrid. And it's like, sometimes it baffles me. It's like, well, if you got so much outboard gear and preamps, that tells me you really don't have confidence in your plugins that are supposed to be so great. And some people say, well, they'll make up excuses. Well, I like the warmth. Sometimes I want to run stuff through the signal path of an actual LA2A for my bass or my vocals. I like this. And there goes the argument of, then, it's kind of like, and I get with the console. Sometimes you just don't want such a big console because they are heavy. They're big. They're big and they're heavy, and they are not. Of all the gear, it's one of the hardest gears to just. It's because of its weight. I totally get it. Even though, in my opinion, consoles have been the staple part of the sound of a recording studio and the centerpiece of almost any recording studio for years. Is when the first thing you walk into a lock control room, you see that console, you see that SSL there, or that Neve, or that MCI, or whatever console it is, and you see that, and you'll see the tape machine in the corner, and you'll start seeing all the outboard gear, and you see and everything is just ambience, like lighting, the way the room is designed, the acoustic paneling, everything else creates the ambience and the sound, acoustics, and everything else. But that console with the rack gear and the outboard gear has been the staple of. This is the reason why when you go to Blackbird Studios, that's why they still have it set up like that. The only difference is they start using Pro Tools and interfaces, high-end interfaces. But so that which they now became hybrid, and of course now we're getting into this where everyone's getting into this, what we call what I'm talking about. I'm drawing a blank. It'll come to me in a second. It will come to me in a second about the way the new mixing Atmos. A lot of people are starting to get into that, but to me, Atmos really overall. It has its benefits, but it's more beneficial if you're going to mix, especially for movie stuff. I don't really see the benefit of that in music, but I'm sure it has a purpose. I'm sure it has some effect to it. But other than that, that's going to do it for this video. I don't know why there's an argument. Oh, I know what I want to say before I end the video about the inner box versus the analog. The whole heart of what I'm trying to say with the whole thing is on the inner box versus the analog is, it's not so much of the in the box versus the analog that really matters. All it really matters is a person likes their workflow. Some people love working on the console and using a patch bay and using outboard gear and even a hard disk recorder or an 8-ATS or whatever the case, or a 2-inch tape machine. Some people love that workflow. It works for them. They work that way. This is the way some people love the mix on a console. Like Crystal Algae and Bob Clearmountain love mixing consoles. They came up that way, and it's like, well, it's been working for me. There's no need to change because, just because some people love to work with a mouse in their DAW using a mixed console doesn't mean that just because you love working that way doesn't mean that Crystal Algae need to change the way you do things. That's the dumbest thought process ever. If someone goes around and says, well, I drive a BMW 528, so you ought to drive a BMW 528. Well, hey, if that's the case, let's just take every other single car from Teslas to Cadillacs to Mustangs to Corvettes and just all throw them in the ocean. And let's all just drive BMW 528s. The dumbest concept, ideology, or whatever thought process ever. It's like someone comes up there and say, well, I use a Need 1073 preamp, so you ought to use one. So let's just take every other preamp made out there and throw them away. It's the dumbest concept ever. It's the freedom of choice of what I want to use because I like it. It's like me driving. When I drive my Cadillac CTS, I like driving my Cadillac CS. I don't have to drive a BMW 528 because you got one. It's the same thing. Because you want to work in Pro Tools and use UAD plugins doesn't mean I want to work in Pro Tools and use UAD plugins. I'd rather use Studio One and use my IK Multimedia plugins. It's because it's what I like. I like my workflow. It works for me. So people need to stop that crap as well. But overall, it's workflow. It's a preference of workflow. That's all it is. This is the argument of in the box versus analog, plugins versus hardware, whatever. It's all workflow. If you like using plugins, use plugins. If you like using analog gear, use analog gear. If you like working on a console, use a console. If you don't want to use a console, don't get a console. It's that easy. We make this thing, people make this thing so much harder than it need to be, or they make these ridiculous comparisons or arguments when they're mute. So if you got a guy that likes to work in Cubase and use Soundtoy plugins, and it's about how to use this stuff, not about what it is. It's about, can you use it, know how to use it. If you know how to do it and use it, that's all that matters. The results of all this music being made is going to be pretty much the same, where no one can tell that someone used Cubase or Pro Tools or Studio One and plugins or outboard gear or console, whatever, anyway. Most people can't tell. Even though there are slight, you have to have some keen, ridiculous ears to hear such small differences between all that. So that's my little rant. Other than that, I hope everyone stays warm and just make music. Y'all have a great one.